We've been getting a lot of questions about Cuba since we came back, so we thought that we would just make a quick video, tell y'all what we learned, and it's mostly taking place from an American point of view since it's different for Americans to travel there.
Yeah, we're filming a whole travel show, but there aren't a lot of people who document how to get to Cuba as an American because not that many people have gone. So I just felt like it was really important to communicate some of these things because they can make the difference between having a great time in Cuba and having a lousy time in Cuba.
Yeah. And some photo advice too.
Right. So we'll get to the actual Cuba-specific tips in a bit. I know people are going to ask about the gear that we brought. What did you take to Cuba, Chelsea?
The Nikon D810 and the Sigma 24-105.
Why not the Canon 5 DSR?
Well, the file sizes are really large, and I didn't want to have to deal with that. And I didn't think it was necessary for street photography, which is what I mostly wanted to do.
Yeah. I brought the Sony A7R II with the Metabones adapter and the same lens, the Sigma 24-105, because it's just an awesome combination. I love the Sony, and I was recording 4K video, but the Sony lenses, Sony zoom lenses, aren't great, and for travel, I like to have that 24-105 range. But I also brought super wide angle lenses, a 15-30 and a 16-35, and we never felt the need to break them out. I had a 70-200, we never broke it out.
Yeah.
24-105 was fine. I also use the Osmo a lot, so you'll see some of that B-roll as we're talking, DJ Osmo. And it simply refused to connect to my phone the whole way, so I used it blind, but it did function.
One thing that was beautiful about the city, especially photographically, was how rustic it was. It has beautiful Spanish architecture, but it's aging. A lot of it's crumbling, but it gives a lot of character to the city. Some of it can be inconvenient. There are some roads that are dug up, construction that doesn't get fixed, things like that. But there are also beautiful stucco buildings with cracks and textures and colors and rust, and there's some decay, but it adds to the charm, and I think that's why people like taking pictures there.
Particularly in contrast to the really bright colors that you see either painted on the walls, often peeling paint, or in the people's clothes. Tend to be really brightly colored. The cars tend to be brightly colored. So it is this just amazing backdrop.
And there are beautiful restored blocks as well, but I was actually more interested in the blocks that were just more typical.
Yeah, many of the tourist districts have perfectly maintained sidewalks and buildings. And in fact, the sidewalks that are perfectly smooth, you'll just see people rollerblading and skateboarding and riding their bikes.
Yeah.
People always ask about the cars. It's the first thing you notice. And it for me, I was struck that it really was, the streets really were just filled with a lot of classic cars, especially American cars. It's one of those things where you see it on TV and you think they probably took a picture of the one American car there.
Yeah, or they're just a few, or...
It's probably 1 out of 3 cars is a classic American car.
Yeah, and they have modern cars. You know, you also only see the classic cars, so some people might think that's the only thing there, but they have Daewoo, and I saw some car brands I'd never heard of, some Korean cars and things like that. But it really is striking, all of the classic cars in their various stages of being refurbished too. Some of them just have Bondo, and you know they're primed but they're not painted yet, and some of them are pristine. It's interesting.
Yeah, the Obama administration is working on opening up trade, but right now they simply can't go get a new carburetor for their 57 Bel Air. Yeah. So they've hacked it together, and sometimes they've replaced the whole engine. Sometimes they've just managed to piece it together. As a result, some of the cars can be make a little louder than you might expect. And the city overall has this kind of din of big American V8s and such.
Yeah.
But it didn't bother me at all. The cars are not always those cars that you see at a car show, but sometimes they are. Sometimes they're absolutely pristine. Other times you can tell people will be in the streets actively repairing the cars, and you see that they do whatever they have to do to keep it running. It's pretty amazing, and it's also part of just the backdrop that makes Havana just a beautiful place.
A lot of people want to pick up cigars when they go to Havana, and I was surprised. I thought it would be easier to get them, but to make sure that you're getting authentic cigars, you'll want to go to the factory or an appropriate dealer. There will be people that will try to sell you Cuban cigars for cheaper from their home, which is illegal, and they're knockoffs. They can be made from banana leaves or scraps, but they're not an authentic Cuban cigar. It takes people 9 to 12 months to learn how to roll an authentic Cuban cigar. So if you're going to go there, you may as well get the real deal.
Yeah, there wouldn't be much point in just picking up one of the knockoffs, but you will have people try to sell them to you. Mm-hmm. If you get the original ones, you can, as an American, you can bring back $100 per person.
I don't know what the rest
in
of the
cigars
world can do, but
yeah, I don't think they're restricted. But that would mean a box of about 4 cigars. So you're not going to come back with an armload of cigars if they're the real ones.
Mm-hmm.
And if you get one of the higher quality ones, you might come back with 1 or 2 cigars. Yeah. But you can pretty much smoke as many as you want while you're there. I will say we got approached in the street with a rather sophisticated entrepreneurship that involved at least 3 different people, but possibly more. It was fairly well organized. We had the first guy approach us in the street, just kind of overheard our American accent, and he struck up conversation, asked us where we were staying, and then went about his day, left us. It just seemed like you talked to a friendly person.
Yeah.
But then moments later, a woman approached us and said she knew us from the hotel, that she worked
She was
at the
our
hotel.
housekeeping.
Yeah, and she named the hotel, and it was only in hindsight that we realized the first person had figured out what hotel we were at and communicated it to the second person who did not know us.
Yeah, and she waited about a block to catch up with us.
Yeah.
So yeah, they'll go out of their way to try to sell you fake. So.
And she brought us to somebody's home where they were selling cigars in their home. So they can't obviously openly advertise we're selling cigars here, so they have this technique to kind of channel you in there.
Yeah.
And you will get a better price, but they probably won't be the real thing.
Street photography. This was my favorite kind of photography while we were there. I love the colors of the buildings, and the people wear bright colors. And I also love the fact that there's this really nice communal energy, and people are living their lives in the streets. So they're playing football, they're playing soccer, they're, talking to their friends, just kind of normal city life.
A lot of people feel intimidated to take pictures of people just in the street. How did you feel about it?
It was just the way that I normally take street photography. I tried to be inconspicuous, and respectful, but nobody seemed upset by it. In fact, people smiled if they did notice me.
Yeah.
And I would usually kind of try to work out my settings and things before turning the camera on someone to get more candid shots. And then, turn to them, snap a few pictures, and move on. I found if I stood still for a long time, sometimes I would find a beautiful door and I'd wait for someone to walk in front of it. And if I stood there too long taking pictures, people would start approaching me. Do you want a taxi? Do you want to buy this? Do you want to buy that? That's fine, except suddenly I'm not inconspicuous anymore. I'm the most noticeable thing around because I've got 2 or 3 people asking me questions. So I learned to move fast. Some of my pictures were blurry for that reason. I just kind of be like on the run, snapping some pictures to get them candid. But
I don't think there's any chance that anybody who's not from Cuba is going to fit in like a local. I think no matter who you are going to look like a tourist, but we did find that we got hassled a lot less when we didn't have our cameras out.
Yeah.
When you had that big DA-10, you usually just kept on a strap. Definitely more people approached us. I started just hiding my camera away in this everyday messenger bag that I brought. Mm-hmm. Keeping stuff out of sight, and then we were able to travel around a little easier. The food in Cuba. Everybody asks about the food, and I think as an American especially, we have a preconception of what the food is going to be because we get some Cuban food. Like this picture of a sign for a Cuban sandwich, which has like many different types of meat on it and sauces and a fancy roll. Yeah. And that's kind of not the experience in Cuba.
We had, they have kind of typical Caribbean food. So rice, beans, plantains, meats, pork. And the first night we had more of a gourmet meal, which was good. We got the chicken and the pork and things, and that was, I think, what people would more expect. And then the street food was very different than I expected. Like the jamon sandwich was just a piece of meat on a bun, and that was kind of what the locals were eating as street food. So
yeah, anyway, it tends to be very, very simple and not that complex. Also look for the restaurants particular. That's a key word that just means it's a private business. And Cuba is a communist country, and they haven't had the ability to have private businesses or even private residences for very long. This is a really new kind of progressive thing for them. Mm-hmm. So if it's not a restaurant particular, it's run by the government. And if you can imagine what restaurants run by the government are like, well, it's perfectly editable, it's passable, but you don't kind of get like large pops of flavor or anything. Your passport and visa. Most of the world is free to come and go from Cuba. U.S. citizens are not. And in fact, we for the longest time, we were not allowed to visit at all, unless you were like a diplomat or something. Mm-hmm. The Obama administration has loosened this up so that anybody with one of like 13 different reasons can
visiting
visit
family,
Cuba.
Working, things like that.
Yeah, so for example, if you're going as a journalist, you can go and visit Cuba, or you can find a tour group who will arrange a one-on-one interaction with somebody in Cuba, and that would make it legal too. But they're doing this kind of weird government thing where they're saying, you have to have one of these 13 reasons, but you don't have to tell us ahead of time. You don't have to like apply and get it approved. You can just go and
just hope we don't find you out.
But they even kind of wink and say, we're probably not going to check up on it afterwards. So it's kind of, they're saying it's not legal to just go as a tourist to Cuba.
Yeah.
But they're also saying we're probably not going to check. It'd be like if they said, the speed limit's 55, but we're definitely not enforcing that.
Yeah.
You'll see a lot of information online about your visa, which is not your passport. Your visa is your passport comes from the United States or your home country. The visa is something specific to Cuba, and it's basically a small tax that you pay to visit the country. It's a little form that you have to keep track of. And what is it, like $20? I think it was $20.
I don't remember, $25.
They also call it a travel card. You don't generally need to get it ahead of time.
I had such a difficult time researching that. It seemed so complicated, and then they just gave it to us when we got there.
Yeah, generally your airline will work that out for you. So whatever airline you take into Cuba, just ask them. But in our case, when we were in the Grand Cayman changing airplanes to get to Cuba, they just said, hey, do you need a visa? And we said, yes. And they said $20. So bring along some cash to pay for that.
And then,
speaking of money, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
The money in Cuba is very unusual and kind of complex. They have two separate currency systems, what they call CUPs and CUCs. And
convertibles and pesos.
Yeah, so the CUC is the convertible money. That is money for tourists. And it oddly is based on the US dollar. So one CUC, one convertible, is always $1 by definition.
Yeah, not based on the US dollar, but it pretty much is one-to-one.
Yeah, they do base it on that system. And then you have the Cuban peso, which is what the locals use.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't generally exchange, well, anyway, it's roughly 26 Cuban pesos to one convertible peso. So they have these two separate currency systems, tourists and residents, and it's a weird way. The way it works out is tourists end up paying far more for stuff than the residents do.
They have a big smile on their face in the local places when we walk in with the convertibles.
Yeah.
I didn't try to use the local currency, and I intentionally didn't because
it didn't feel too bad to just overpay for stuff.
I didn't feel.
Because generally, even at a 26 multiple, stuff wasn't too overpriced.
No. I mean, if an ice cream was one convertible, I wasn't going to ask to pay the local currency so I could pay 5 cents or something. It's like.
Yeah. Some places will have prices listed in CUC, and that's the convertible peso. That's a tourist price. If they don't say that, then the prices are in the local pesos.
Mm-hmm.
So if you see a price and it doesn't say CUC, then that's the local pesos, and you can still get it with your convertible pesos. You just need to negotiate them. So it really helps to have a basic understanding of Spanish, especially numbers like 1 through 100 would probably be particularly useful. If you just go and pay the local price with your convertible pesos, they will not stop you and say, whoa, you're paying 26 times too much for that. No, they will just happily take it. Just so be aware of that.
You should just also have an understanding, unless you don't mind wildly overpaying, but sometimes something will be one of their pesos and you'll say, how many convertibles? And they'll say 5. They're just like, I don't know. What's it worth to you kind of thing. So,
yeah.
Whatever you're comfortable with, that by the end I would just offer and they would usually take it. So
yeah.
I did read a blog from an American that went to Cuba and he converted to the local currency. He really wanted a local experience, but people were irritated with him.
Yeah.
Because he was supposed to be going into the tourist side and he would go into the local side and want to pay the local currency. And they were just kind of like, based on this guy's account, they were a little put off. I don't know if that applies to everyone, but.
So most of the world, you can go into Cuba and use your credit cards, use your ATM cards to withdraw money. It's not the case for Americans, not at this moment.
No, you have to just bring cash.
You need to enter the country with all the cash that you could possibly spend, plus a handful of extra dollars for whatever. You need extra money. And keep in mind that the taxi ride to your hotel will probably be $25, 25 convertible pesos. And the ride back will be $25, 25 convertible pesos. So when you get there, I would take that money and your passport and lock it in your safe so that if you lose the rest of your money, at least you can get back to the airport.
Yeah. And many things are inexpensive, but some things that are specifically for the tourists, like those, they have just scenic taxi rides and really nice classic cars. That was about $40. So
I think it was like $40 for an hour or $25 for a half hour.
Yeah.
Yeah. So by the way, that convertible ride was a lot of fun, really beautiful. Pick a car that you like and you'll get to ride around with it. The guide will usually give you a little bit of a tour. Ours didn't speak much English and our Spanish wasn't great, but we did manage to get the gist of what was happening.
Yeah. And
it's also a great way to see the city.
Other activities, like some of the museums, were only $1 to $3 or convertibles, whatever, about that much. So I guess what I'm trying to say is just trying to give them an idea of how much money to bring. It's not like you have to bring a lot of money, especially since the meals aren't that expensive.
But this happens a lot. When we looked it up, Americans run out of money in Cuba and they cannot get more money. So you have to beg, borrow, or steal at that point. Make sure you have more money than you could possibly spend for the entire trip. Keep most of it in your safe. Use that like the ATM. When you go to convert if you go to convert dollars to convertible pesos there, you can do it in the airport. They'll charge you like 10%.
Yeah.
And your hotel will usually charge you 10%.
I've heard that
or
euros
more.
convert easier too. If someone's interested in that, they could look up if it was worth it to convert to euros at home, and then, but it would depend. If you care about doing the research, then.
Yeah. And as an American, you also can't go to your bank and get the currency ahead of time. So you pretty much have to convert it there. So you'll be traveling there with a big wad of dollars. Nobody cares about your American credit card or ATM. They're useless.
Wi-Fi.
Yeah, internet access can be a bit of a challenge in Cuba. The government runs the internet. Sometimes they're known to just turn it off. Bandwidth is never much. Our hotel happened to have Wi-Fi and an Ethernet cable that worked better. So we were able to use that to upload some pictures from Twitter and stuff. Check us out on Twitter. We have pictures from our trips and stuff as we're out. But many hotels don't. Many people don't have Wi-Fi. And in fact, you'll know a building has Wi-Fi because you'll see people leaning against the building with their tablets like this.
Or their laptops, just really close to the building.
Against the wall, just trying to get the best signal that they possibly can. And the internet can often be restricted. I couldn't get to our bank's website. That was just simply blocked. You will not be watching YouTube videos or even uploading videos, but still images.
YouTube?
It's similar to dial-up bandwidth. It's a little more than dial-up. But
taxis.
I mentioned...
They're everywhere. They're plentiful. They have the taxi bikes, and people ask you if you want a taxi in the tourist district especially. And
negotiate a price ahead of time.
Yeah, you want to negotiate the price ahead of time and ask if it's per person or for both people or however many people in your party.
Yeah, sometimes you'll get to your destination and they'll say, oh, we agreed on 5 pesos, but it was per person.
Yeah, and make sure to tell them to put the meter on as well.
Yeah, good luck with that. We never... They have, the real taxis have meters in them, but they often don't use them, and often they just say they're broken or they won't use them. At least that's what I read. I didn't see anybody using a meter a single time. Here's a story.
You have a story.
Let's
hear it.
We went into one of the government-run museums. It was just a little museum about Havana, and this has never happened to me before, but we got hit up for a tip from 2 of the security guards. You were taking a picture of something in a room where pictures were not allowed by accident. And she pulled you aside and actually moved you out of the way of the security cameras. Like being helpful, like you can't take pictures, but if you stand over here, nobody can see you take pictures, that kind of thing.
That blew my mind. I was like, this place is great.
And then later, she came up and struck up a conversation with us, borrowed your camera and took a series of pictures, took pictures of us, took pictures of the room. And then she explained that she was a professional photographer and she wanted us to pay her for her time. Of course, she pulled us outside of the view of the cameras to do the actual money exchange. So they had this kind of photography business going on.
Yeah, where they took your picture and
under the nose of their
supervisors. They didn't come out because I had back button autofocus on. She didn't know about that. So, yeah.
So that's the kind of thing that happened. You can be in a museum and the security guards will hit you up for tips.
But we could have just said no thank you. It wasn't
we could have just
aggressive.
walked
They
away.
were nice about it, and we could have just said, no, we're not interested. But
that's the thing. There's almost no violent crime in Cuba. So you're relatively safe as long as you're doing mostly legal stuff. You're relatively free from any physical risks. But this is how entrepreneurship expresses itself in a communist country. At least that's my theory. People set up little businesses kind of outside of the view of cameras. That's
what I would do. You make like $20 a month, and then someone comes in with a $3,000 camera. I'd be like, I could be a photographer.
Another couple of entrepreneurs that we ran into struck up a conversation. Started by saying what cool shoes they had, and my shoes were pretty cool. So I was like, this guy he has good taste in shoes also.
You're like, yeah, he likes me for my shoes.
Asks us where we're from, and then says that, the typical tourist bars are terrible and we should check out this one local place. And he's like, it's on my way. I'll just show you as we're walking there.
Yeah.
And then we get there and he and his female friend bring us in and they're chatting us up and we see the bartender start to pour drinks and we're like, no, we don't want to drink. Turns out this is a thing that happens. This is how they get people into bars. They'll find some tourists, bring them in there. They set you up with drinks, and then when you get the bill, it might be more than would typically be listed on the menu.
Well, I said to the waiter, no, I don't want drinks. And then I turned around and he was pouring a drink for each of us. Mm-hmm. And then we just booked. We were like, bye, no drinks. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's almost like they get a sales fee.
Yeah. It's like they're getting commission, basically.
Yeah. And just a warning, we missed our connecting flight out of Cuba through no fault of our own. But the Cuban airline that we took on the way back, they were running 2 hours late. And
yeah, I think most people with a connecting flight missed it. Another woman did as well.
And apparently it's not uncommon with that Cuban airline because they just don't, they're low on the ladder at the airport, so they might not be able to get a gate.
Yeah.
Anyway, all I just want to say, leave extra time for your connecting flights.
Yeah, just
2.5 hours for us was not enough.
Yeah.
4 hours would have been safer.
Yeah. Just leave a couple extra hours than you normally would.
Don't drink the water. The locals don't even drink the water without boiling it. Just be careful about that. Order your drinks sin hielo, without ice, because the ice can melt and have whatever bad stuff is in it.
Yeah. Wow, Tony, you really got this.
That's about it. I hope that helps. We just had a lot of people asking for tips, and I thought,
feel like we ended it so negative. Don't do this, don't do that.
Cuba is
it's
an
beautiful.
Absolutely beautiful place.
Yeah.
And I feel like we both got portfolio pictures out of it, which we don't on a typical trip. It's absolutely stunning. The photographic opportunities are amazing. And you will have a great time if you go there properly prepared. And if you go there not properly prepared, it will be a struggle. Either way, it's a great experience. People are worried that Americans will come in and ruin it once we open up the embargo.
Yeah.
I'm not as worried about that. There's been a steady stream of European tourists. So I don't think you have to rush in there before the Americans get in. We're not this big herd of fatzos just throwing McDonald's everywhere. It's not going to be quite so sudden. But Americans do have the opportunity now.
Yeah.
And I'm sure at some point, the Cuba does seem to be becoming more and more commercialized. But I think you've got some time. You don't have to sprint to Cuba before the fat Americans come in.
I believe that when they said the Europeans were saying that the Americans were going to ruin it. And I was like, I need to get there before we ruin it. But then you go there and there's just a bunch of honky Europeans. They fit into Cuba. It's not like you guys are blending in seamlessly. I went there and I'm like, whoa. You people are white. They got the hat on.
Uh-huh.
And I thought it was funny because I went there kind of I don't want to ruin it. I'm an American. The rest of the world makes fun of me. I was like, what the? Anyway.
If you're planning a trip to Cuba, let us know in the comments.
If
you have other tips, write them in the comments and hopefully other people can find it and learn from it. Subscribe to see lots of videos about photography and learning photographic techniques. Share with your friends. Give us a like. Thank you.
Thanks. Enjoy.